Well, my three fans know that the focus of my channel is to go exploring old movies of the past, generally from the 1940s, but I wanted to do something a little bit different this time, and I wanted to talk about a new show on Paramount Plus, Star Trek Picard, specifically Season 3, because this one really took me by surprise. And don't worry, my focus on this channel will always remain digging into films of the past. But I just felt like this was a weird one off that I wanted to talk about. Now, to be completely honest, I had mostly checked out of watching anything related to Star Trek since roughly 2001. And that was when the series Star Trek Voyager came to an end. All right, long story, digging into the past here. At one point, I considered myself something of a Trekkie. I was a big fan of Star Trek. In the early 1980s, my dad would make VHS recordings of the original Star Trek series. He was taping these, I think it was from the local public television station. And I remember watching this and loving this series. The colors, the kind of campy special effects and acting and stuff. You know, episodes like The Trouble with Tribbles or The Doomsday Machine. So anyhow, the 1980s were to me a golden age of Star Trek. Both watching these old episodes and also watching the Star Trek films with the original crew. You know, like The Wrath of Khan and The Search for Spock. I really loved those films as well. You know, it might be fun to review those sometime in the future. But in any case, I loved the classic Star Trek series. I used to faithfully read Starlog magazine to get news and updates. And in fact, I once even met Jimmy Doohan in Oklahoma City at a Star Trek convention. He played Scotty. So, yeah, I was a full on Trekkie back in the day. So, of course, in the late 1980s, when news came out of a new show featuring a next generation Star Trek crew, I was thrilled. So, Star Trek The Next Generation, I loved it. It was a blast. They had the colorful crew of characters, they had exciting new adventures, great music and special effects going to strange new worlds, and I loved it. My interest continued throughout the entirety of the series, and I even watched the spin off films, and I even watched the spin off series like Deep Space Nine, which actually turned out to be one of my favorites in terms of stories. But as we got into the 2000s, my interest in Star Trek really started to ebb and wane. I never really got into the series Star Trek Enterprise, although I do like Scott Bakula as an actor. Something about the original Star Trek magic just wasn't there anymore, and when the J.J. Abrams Star Trek films arrived around 2009, I don't know, it felt like Star Trek had become something completely different, maybe a little more commercial, a little less intelligent, and those thoughtful themes had all been replaced with more of an action-oriented scope, which, honestly, I watch the films, and they're okay if you want escapist popcorn silliness with big special effects and lens flares and so on, but it didn't really feel to me like Star Trek anymore. It was more just like a general science fiction themed action adventure film series. Okay, long-winded introduction over. That brings us to the early 2020s. So this is a time frame where we're kind of at now, and I'm much more interested in that treasury of films of the past. I'm going 70, 80 years in the past, loving all these films, and I honestly have not given much thought to Star Trek for a long, long time, other than occasionally watching some of the old episodes. So I hear from my friend Patrick. He was one of my buddies from high school, and we'd hang out and talk about Star Trek and RoboCop and stuff like that. Well, he messaged me, and he recommended that I check out season 3 specifically of the show Picard. I haven't seen anything of the Picard series. I didn't watch season 1 or 2. Heck, I haven't watched anything of the recent Star Trek programs like Discovery and I don't know. I mean, there's so many spin-offs. It's almost like Star Wars, where there's so many different iterations of the show. I don't even know what's going on or what timeline it is, but my friend Patrick recommended I check out this series because he said it's being produced by someone now who has a love and a respect of Star Trek and Next Generation. So I decided, why not? Let's give it a try. So I signed up for Paramount Plus. A side note, not a lot of good stuff on Paramount Plus, but curiously enough, they do have a number of old Hopalong Cassidy films, which is kind of interesting to me. So just keep that in mind. So I'm going to give a very basic, high-level summary. And I'm going to do this because half the fun of this series was seeing how these old characters and friends were reintroduced. So by going too much into detail about it, I'm going to be dropping spoilers left and right, and I don't want to do that. This show was fun to watch week by week just to see how these old characters would return. But the basic plot is that Captain Jean-Luc Picard, he receives a distress signal from an old friend, Dr. Beverly Crusher, and with the help of his friend and former commander, Captain William Riker, they travel on a starship to make a rescue mission. But things turn more serious as a mysterious enemy appears. And again, not digging into the details too much, but through a series of events, old friends and allies are brought into this story, and this brave crew must face off against, well, you really got to see it for yourself. And again, no spoilers here. I can't give too much away. So I'll avoid saying much more than that along the way, they will be reunited with characters like Worf and Data and Geordi LaForge, to the point that we eventually have the entire crew together again. Now, there was no Wesley Crusher. I don't know what happened to his character, but that must have been explained at some point in the past. And of course, Tasha Yar, well, she died. I think they would have had to do some time travel stuff to explain bringing her back. But in any case, the show is littered with additional cameos, many familiar faces that, again, I don't want to get into, but if you're like me and you were a fan of The Next Generation from long ago, you're watching this and you're going, hey, I know that person, or well, I know her, and it was a lot of fun for those little cameos. Now, does the show sometimes get a little heavy-handed with the nostalgia? Yeah, but maybe, but but it keeps on track, and if you're an old fan, it's a lot of fun. Maybe it is a little heavy-handed, I will admit. And honestly, in thinking about, what was the big message of this show? What was it really all about? To me, this just felt like it's just one large reunion show. One last Star Trek: The Next Generation adventure. Maybe it's not completely plausible how they all get back together again. Maybe there are some massive plot holes, but who cares? To see the Next Generation crew again for one more mission, it was a blast. And I really did enjoy this. Enough that I thought, I'm going to do a quick video and talk about it. Now, here's the thing. This series is called Picard, but honestly, this was a Star Trek: The Next Generation show. He's in the program, but there's so much focus on so many other characters. You can't help but think that, no, this is Star Trek: The Next Generation. And what I really appreciated about this was how these original Next Generation characters show up, and they all have some sort of a unique subplot of their own. It's not necessarily anything tremendously heavy or deep. It's just a standard subplot. But in some way, they each had their own unique story that's told. So it's not just like, oh, hey, here's Worf, he's back again. But no, they all have their own story that's sort of integral to this entire plot going forward. I really love how they wrote this to be mindful of giving all of the characters a fair amount of attention. Now, there was one new character that I really enjoyed. This was the character Captain Shaw. Now, he is the original captain of the Titan, the starship that Picard and Riker used to go to help save their friend. And this Captain Shaw is this headstrong, unyielding character who, frankly, I thought he was great. He's sort of a jerk, and he sees through Riker and Picard's deception. He suspects they're up to something. And his no-nonsense character was, to me, just an unexpected highlight of the series. I love characters like that. But to be honest, as the show goes on, he's sort of shuffled more into the background. And that's expected, I guess, as the focus will turn more onto Picard and the classic Next Generation crew. But again, the series isn't just about the Next Generation. This Jack Crusher narrative is sort of the main drive of the story as we try to figure out, who is he? What's the deal with his weird visions and powers and so on? Now, initially watching this, when he's seeing these visions of these red vines and tendrils, I was thinking, oh no, it's kind of like a Stranger Things twist. But again, as the story unfolds, it all starts to make sense and it comes together very nicely when you see what's going on. What I liked about this series is how nothing was ever really completely as you expected. I kept guessing, oh, I bet this is what's going to happen. And nope, there were numerous twists and turns that just they kept you guessing, wondering what was going on. And when the big final reveal takes place, I mean, it was great to see all the characters like Data and Geordi fit right back into their old character again, analyzing the threat and, going through all the details of how they'll handle it. I mean, it was just like those old moments from the old series. It's like stepping back into the next generation. I mean, it felt so much like an old episode put together into one final movie. So there were 10 episodes of Picard Season 3 that, in thinking about it, they could have almost broken these into like 3 movies almost on their own. The first film is sort of the introduction and the setup that leads to the initial threat and some of the conflict. And then you could have made a second film maybe dealing with the second conflict of the film being introduced. And then the third film could bring a final resolution. I don't know. I was just kind of thinking about it. 10 episodes, you could have made a movie of it. It would have been a really long one movie if you did. But I don't know, just a thought. Now, if this was a film, would I have considered this to be the best of the Star Trek Next Generation films? Well, honestly, no. I think that would still remain Star Trek First Contact. I mean, that's probably my favorite film of the Next Generation crew. And, I know it's not a perfect film, but I did like the humor. I like the Borg and the Jerry Goldsmith music, and how even though the film uses the overused time travel device, it still brought us back to the first steps of the Federation and meeting the Vulcans and so on. So that's why I like First Contact so much. I'm sorry, I'm really going off on a tangent here, but it felt to me like that was the best of the Next Generation in cinema. However, Picard Season 3 was really a close second if you look at this season and think of it as a Star Trek Next Generation film. Now, a note, is it perfect? No. I mean, the biggest fault to me is honestly how dark everything looks. I mean, what happened to all the lights on the bridge and around the ship? Another thing is with this Star Trek Picard is there were a couple strong profanities peppered in that just didn't seem to fit the Next Generation universe. I know it's a more modern era, and there's just something wrong about old Captain Picard uttering an F-bomb. It didn't seem to fit into me. But, I don't know, there you have it, I guess. I also thought it was a little clumsy and unsubtle in how this served as a vehicle for kicking off what presumably will be a spin-off series with the character 7 of 9 as a captain. I mean, I get it. They were forward-thinking, and they thought, well, where are we going to go from here? And no doubt her show will feature cameos by legacy characters and so on, as hinted by the end credits scene. But, those are just some minor complaints, and otherwise, Picard Season 3 was just fantastic. So those are my thoughts, and who knows? Maybe I'll watch it again someday, but for now, that was enough for me to revisit the Star Trek Next Generation crew one final time. And again, if you're like me, and the Next Generation was a big thing for you in the past, then go out and give Star Trek Picard Season 3 a try. All right, time to get back to those old classic movies. In the meantime, live long and prosper.